Welcome to the Football Guys Dynasty newsletter. I'm your host, Adam Wilde, joined by my co host, Chris Allen. Chris, are you ready to discuss 36 Dynasty relevant free agent signings?
Absolutely not. I don't know why you made me do this.
So we'll just talk about the important ones at the top, and then we'll go through to make sure that we fill everybody in on all the contracts. You might have forgot some of them were almost a week ago. Um, We're going to start with quarterback, go by position. So let's go Dak Prescott first. Dak Prescott with the monster $160 million deal on 4 years, resigns with Dallas. So last season, before Dak Prescott's injury, we weren't just looking at the best offense in football. We were looking at one of the best offenses ever. Of course, he gets injured and then everything drops off with Andy Dalton. But if we can get a fully healthy Dak Prescott coming back and the things that he did with Kellen Moore, it's going to be stock up for everybody, right? So especially CD Lamb, Amari Cooper, Zeke's still under contract for who knows a million years, right? I think it does good for everyone. We'll have to see with the health, but I'm going to say probably you're going to say 3-2. I think probably QB5 for me in Dynasty, but if nobody has them that high, I do think that you go out and try to make a trade for them.
Yeah, I think that's about where it falls for me. I'd put him at like QB3, QB4. Just looking at the way that the offense was run over the last couple of seasons, neutral passing rate up to about 60%. And then also with the addition of CeeDee Lamb, I mean, we're not only talking about high volume, but also high efficiency when you have dynamic pass catchers like Amari Cooper, CD, even Michael Gallup now. I mean, even though we saw dips in his production, that was mostly when Andy Dalton was under center, not Dak Prescott. But either way, I think looking at the way that Dak can produce both as a passer but also as a rusher, he was number 6 in terms of rushing from within the 20-yard line amongst all quarterbacks in 2019, had a similar rushing rate in 2020 before he went down in week 6. So at the very least, I think if you're looking for that hashtag Konami type of production, I think Dak can definitely provide that to you. So I think as it really does depend on what his health situation looks like once he comes back from the ankle surgeries. I guess he went back in for a cleanup just a few months ago. So, but either way, I still think that there's a way that he can still return that level of value. So I'm bullish on the Dallas offense as a whole. So I'm definitely trying to scoop up Dak or parts and pieces of it as I possibly can. But moving on to another rushing quarterback, so New England, I mean, Cam Newton after his first season, I mean, some folks I know I was in that camp. I was hype about the way that they opened up the season. I mean, that was one of the New England game versus Seattle, I thought was one of the best games, like early on in the season. But things just kind of really trailed off, especially after Cam was diagnosed with COVID, and just the rest of the team looked like completely fell apart. But he's back with New England now on a 1-year, $14 million deal. Now, most of it's a incentive laden deal. So I mean, I only think he has like 6 to 8 million guaranteed. But either way, it still looks like at the very least his value from a dynasty perspective is at least stable. Not just because he has a job, but also from the fact that they've added some wide receivers and pass catchers around him, which we'll talk about once we get to the tight end section. So where are you at with Cam, Adam?
Yeah, so it does seem that New England knows something that we don't, right? Because I thought that he might end up being a backup, maybe not in the league this year after seeing last year, but maybe New England knows how much COVID had to do with things, how much the fact that they only had Damiere Byrd and Jacoby Myers had to do with things. It seems like they were never really too upset with Cam himself, and they improved on his incentive laden deal that he had last year, which was only a max of I think 5 million. And now we're looking at 14 million. So in terms of Dynasty Superflex, you're still looking at a 1-year contract, but this means that NFL teams, a very good NFL team, views him as a starting caliber quarterback. So if you could still get him for something like a mid to late second, I don't know that you can now. I would do that for sure in Dynasty. So the next one's a doozy, right? We have Drew Brees retiring. That's where we start.
Rip.
Then you see Taysom Hill, $140 million contract for 4 years, and your mind explodes. And then they re-signed Jameis Winston.
Yeah.
I said, wait, did I just see $140 million? So the $140 million means almost literally nothing. So he's going to get like $9 million this year. And they say it's kind of like a skeleton workup of if he becomes a franchise caliber quarterback, they have the workings there for. So I don't know, but I don't think that he ends up starting. We've got an open competition between Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston, and I almost certainly think that Jameis Winston's going to end up being the starter. Last time Jameis Winston was a starter in the league, he threw for 5,000 yards. He also threw quite a few interceptions.
A few.
But just a few. But I do think that Taysom Hill maintains about 20%, which means 20% comes off Jameis Winston. That should be factored into his value. Now, it's only a one-year deal again, just like we just talked about with Cam Newton. So team views Jameis Winston as a starting caliber quarterback. Hopefully he does this well this year, and he secures the bag going forward.
I would hope so, but the thing I'm still trying to square in my mind is how the offense is going to play. Like when they're eventually, at least in my mind, they're probably going to eventually wind up swapping out Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston at some point during the season. I just can't see one starting and the other one playing the backup for all 17 games for the 2021 season. So how does that? I mean, how do you teach your offense to play the way that Taysom Hill plays, but then also teach your offense to play the way that Jameis Winston plays? That's a lot. I mean, to think about that, that's a lot for an offensive line to have to either, block or create gaps for a dynamic quarterback like Taysom Hill to play, but then also have a offensive line be able to block and actually pull and hold their positions long enough for Jameis Winston to make his read. So I don't know how I feel about them. And also now since they've lost Emmanuel Sanders, and are we really expecting Traquan Smith to move up? So either way,
to the moon.
Exactly. So I'm less the only player off of that squad that I have any value in right now is still Alvin Kamara. But both of those guys, to me, Taysom, Jameis, they're more of those guys that you stash, you see where things see how things develop over the next year or so. And my hope is that Jameis winds up either getting traded or moved to another squad, and he can start fresh as a starter.
I think Alvin Kamara figures out a few injuries that he can play on the weeks that Taysom Hill's starting.
Maybe, yeah.
I don't think he's too excited with how things go when Taysom's starting for him.
No, I couldn't see that either. I mean, especially after the way that Taysom was taking some of the goal line carries and this, that, and the other. So I can't really see him being all too thrilled about it. But we'll see how it turns out. So to finish off the quarterback position, I mean, a number of other deals were being made over the last week or so. Got Tom Brady restructuring his deal, so now it's down from a 4-year to a 1-year voidable contract. So that provides the Bucs with some cap relief. So as we saw over the past week or so, they were franchise tagging guys like Chris Godwin. This was Shaq Barrett also franchise tagged, or they wound up working on a long-term deal.
So Shaq Barrett got signed, and Chris Godwin signed his franchise tenure already.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So we've got Tom Brady restructuring his deal. We've got Tyrod Taylor going down to Houston in order to back up. We'll see if he's going to back up Deshaun Watson. We'll see. Jacoby Brissett on the move, so he's now down with 2 in Miami. Andy Dalton now, he secures another bag. He takes over for Mitch Trubisky, who moved over to Buffalo. Jared Goff, we already knew about his move over in Detroit. Matthew Stafford, of course, the swap there. Matthew Stafford goes out to L.A. A nice tribute that he put out to Detroit last night. If folks had a chance to see it on Twitter. And then, of course, the Carson Wentz trade, which we all knew about, which was announced back in February. So, Adam, to close out the quarterback position, Adam, what's your favorite moves out of that group of guys?
I really like Ryan Fitzpatrick on the 1 year, because even though Washington had that 7-9 season last year and ended up winning the division, it really they were really missing a quarterback, and you saw they were competitive when Taylor Heineke came in. So they say it's going to be open quarterback battle. I think that Taylor Heineke played out of his mind that game, and it was incredible. I don't see him beating out Ryan Fitzpatrick, and I think that's really, really good for Curtis Samuel, for Terry McLaurin, Logan Thomas, Antonio Gibson, maybe not McKissick. We'll see. I think Antonio Gibson's going to take a lot more of that workload next year. But that's the big one for me. And then the trades, we've had plenty of time to digest that. So let's jump into the biggest running back signing, the one probably least expected. Aaron Jones goes back to Green Bay, 4-year, $48 million. They say he took the hometown discount. I don't know. That's a pretty good contract for a running back. I don't understand why he didn't test the market much, but there's a lot more that goes into this than just money. So that means that in Dynasty, AJ Dillon, his value spiked like I don't know, some
Goes.
sort of random cryptocurrency just spiked to $1, and then he's back down to a couple cents, huh? I mean,
He's Dogecoin. That's what he
yeah,
is.
yeah, exactly. AJ Dillon's GameStop. So, you and I traded AJ Dillon for the 112. I've been an AJ Dillon fan for quite some time, but he was never going to be able to support a full workload. Just given, I do think that he catches better than a lot of people say, but he's not a route runner at all, and he also, I think, could be a little bit of a liability on third down. So whoever he was with, which I thought was going to be Jamal Williams, was going to hurt his stock, which is why we traded him. Now, thank goodness we traded him for the 112, right? Because people are pretty much out on him. Maybe you go buy him now. That people are really upset about him. But huge for Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones loses Jamal Williams as his running mate and his best friend. Hopefully they're still friends. Jamal Williams goes to the Lions. Aaron Jones is probably going to have the most workload of his entire career, in all honesty, because AJ Dillon's not taking the passing work. So who's going to do the passing work? It's going to be Aaron Jones. All Aaron Jones, a little bit of AJ Dillon sprinkled in.
Yeah, that's the hope, at least. I mean, over the last couple of seasons, he's averaged somewhere in like the 60, 70 reception in terms of each season. I could see him like pushing into that like 80 target type of season, which now we're getting into Alvin Kamara territory. I mean, we're getting into like legit workhorse, so like RB1 territory. And now, like, given his workload over the past couple of seasons, I know now he's going to be, 26, 27. I mean, he doesn't have the same workload for a 26, 27-year-old. So if he's going to be continued to be used as this hybrid back, I mean, he's still being used between the tackles, but also as a legitimate, receiver out of the backfield. We could see him have like at least 2-3 more seasons of productivity. And for however long Aaron Rodgers winds up staying in Green Bay, I mean, if those two are tied together, I would say that Aaron Jones' value is like imminently tied to what Aaron Rodgers, what his situation is going to look like. And if Green Bay still hasn't gone out and it's been active in the wide receiver free agent market. So from a pass volume perspective, it's those two that stand to be the largest beneficiaries so far from free agency.
Yeah, and I know I'm going to derail us a little bit here, but I always want to mention with these running backs, there is a debate to be had between age, carries, and contracts. I personally believe the most important thing is the contract, getting that second contract, because we see such a dip in value for these running backs coming off of their rookie deals and going into usually situations where they're not the bell cow anymore, or sometimes you have a situation like Tevin Coleman where you think they're going to jump into a bell cow role and there's just not that many of those to be had. So he's got the coveted second contract, same as Derrick Henry got. So I kind of value the two in a similar light, in where their value's probably never going to go up from here, but they're probably worth what they cost in Dynasty.
Yes, their value should be sustained for at least the next couple of seasons. I mean, unless they wind up drafting one of the RB1s out of this particular class, which I don't see them doing. But I mean, for right now, I think their values at the very least it's sustained.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so looking at his old teammate now, Jamal Williams now moving over to Detroit to back up DeAndre Swift. Of course, the argument that we saw across Twitter, almost immediately after the signing was announced, is now do we knock Swift for the fact that a guy like Jamal Williams is a part of the squad? And at least for me, I think with how much utility that Jamal Williams showed when he was in Green Bay, there's enough for us to be concerned about, at the very least, Swift's pass-catching role and then also his goal line role. I mean, Jamal Williams, it wasn't a ton. I mean, I think about 6 to 8% target share in 2020. But if we're expecting, or we want Swift to have a 16, 17, 18 touch per game type role, having a guy like Jamal Williams, it's not conducive to that type of role. I mean, when Jamal Williams was also being subbed in for Aaron Jones on the goal line, so within the 10, within the 5, we were seeing multiple drives and multiple attempts from Jamal Williams, having that sort of opportunity. Not the type of thing that you would want to see. So if we were already mad about a back like Adrian Peterson taking over for DeAndre Swift. They bring in Jamal Williams now on top of that. That's for me, that's a cause for concern. Stock up for Jamal Williams, but DeAndre Swift, it kind of takes some of the shine off of him, in my opinion.
Yeah, it does take some of the shine off. It's interesting to see the Twitter enforcers that tell everybody hey, if you were mad about this, you've got to be mad about that.
Yes.
Don't tell me what to be mad about. So, I mean, Aaron Jones was productive with Jamal Williams, right? So it's like it's a double-edged sword. I got to play devil's advocate a little bit. Somebody had a fantastic tweet. I'm sorry that I don't remember who said this, but they said DeAndre Swift is like if you put DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams into one player. It's like, yeah.
I saw that.
DeAndre
Swift
can do everything that Jamal Williams can, but that's kind of the point, right? Don't you want two running backs that can do the same thing so you don't change your offense whatsoever when one's on the field? Mm-hmm. I think Jamal Williams is incredible. He's my favorite player, maybe a little bit biased, but he's always rosterable. When players go down, Jamal Williams steps into big roles. I don't know how many times we played him in cash last year, but it was probably a lot. So I think Jamal Williams is always going to be cheap, but he's certainly rosterable, and he's certainly somebody that is worth, if you can throw a third for him or something like that. I mean, maybe now isn't the time, to be completely honest with you. He just signed with a new team, but he signed with DeAndre Swift, who everybody was excited about being a workhorse and eating kneecaps off. So I don't mind. Throw something out there, third caliber player for Jamal Williams, and just he'll have a role. And I don't think that it tanks DeAndre Swift, but if Swift goes down, Jamal Williams is there. He's been there. Mm-hmm. So let's pivot over to Kenyon Drake. Kenyon Drake is going to play behind Josh Jacobs. John Gruden says he views Kenyon Drake as an offensive weapon. Okay, whatever you say. We're not really certain what the Raiders are doing right now in free agency. So he's got a 2-year, $11 million contract. A lot of it's guaranteed. So he's going to do something. I don't know if it's Tavon Austin's pretend 30 touches when he never saw the field, but they seem to think that they're going to use Josh Jacobs and Kenyon Drake. Maybe that's a farce, or maybe it isn't, and you go trade for Josh Jacobs because people are concerned.
It could be, but at the very least, I mean, from a value perspective, I mean, Kenyon Drake was, losing value almost on a week-to-week basis, like in 2020. I mean, if it wasn't Kyler Murray taking away attempts from him, it was Chase Edmonds showing him up. So I get that Kenyon Drake got injured throughout like mid to the back half of the season, but by then, Cat was kind of out of the bag in terms of our hopes for Kenyon Drake being an RB1, and now he's behind Josh Jacobs. I think it craters both of their values. Well, craters might be a bit strong of a word, but at the very least, I mean, whatever you thought that you could get for Kenyon Drake last season, that's gone. Josh Jacobs, his stock is also dropping as well. I mean, now not just with the addition of Kenyon Drake, but also the loss of multiple guys along their offensive line. So it's a situation that I wouldn't want to get involved in. I'm not trying to trade for him. I mean, you might have to take pennies on the dollar if you want to recruit any value from Kenyon Drake if you've been holding on to him at this point. But to me, it's kind of a situation that I would want to avoid. So the last of the guys that we want to try and get into from the running backs, Marlon Mack. The re-signing of Marlon Mack is also one of those confusing running back signings. I mean, after Jonathan Taylor took over, like towards the end of last season, I thought that JT was going to be the RB1. I mean, we were already kind of pushing him up there in terms of where he was going to be at in terms of the dynasty ranks, top 5 RB for most folks. Right. But now with the Marlon Mack re-signing, they still have Jordan Wilkins, I believe. Naheem Hines is still there. So what are we thinking about Marlon Mack?
Yeah, so the signing was concerning, but when you see the contract, it's not so much. I think it was more, it just made sense because there was not going to be a market for Marlon Mack. They liked him. They get to keep him in-house. It's only a 1-year, $2 million deal, so there's not really much incentive. But we had that whole weird thing with Jonathan Taylor for really 3/4 of the season where Frank Reich said we have, the first 15 touches are scripted, and then from there out it's whoever. But it was always Jonathan Taylor that was producing the best, and it was never him finishing the games. So that is kind of concerning for me with Marlon Mack. I mean, we saw too much Jordan Wilkins last year, so I'm sure we're going to see too much Marlon Mack. But that's only 1 year. I think the only difference it does for me in Dynasty is it puts Saquon ahead of Jonathan Taylor. I know we talked about that because you had a startup mock draft that you did where you took Jonathan Taylor 3rd overall. I think maybe I look at Devontae Adams there instead now, or probably just shift Jonathan Taylor behind Saquon. But
And to
nothing,
caveat that
too
mock
dramatic.
draft was in February before people come blow up my mentions.
Right. So we have two more real quick. This doesn't really do anything, but they will be on rosters in deeper leagues. This is Mark Ingram to Houston. That is 1 year, $3 million. We have Carlos Hyde to Jacksonville.
Going back to kick it with his old coach.
Yep. 2 years, $6 million.
Mm-hmm.
So, as our way of saying thanks for checking out what we've got what we're offering you guys. This is new content. We're very happy to be on YouTube. This is our first show, our first newsletter. Thank you all for coming out. We've got an early bird discount going on. So head over to footballguys.com, click on the orange button in the top right that says join now. That will take you right to the early bird discount pricing. Let us do the work and you do the winning. Let's jump into the second half of the show here. We're going to go wide receivers. We've got some important wide receiver signings. This is the meat of the show. Let's start here with Curtis Samuel. Everybody was screaming at Washington to sign Curtis Samuel, so much so that their Twitter account said you can stop screaming at us now. He signs a 3-year, $34.5 million contract. I know you'll talk about his slot percentage, so I won't touch too much on that, but I will say when he did play with Scott Turner 2 years ago, his slot percentage was very low. It was like 19% or something like that. Last year, Curtis Samuel ran 444 snaps from slot, which would have been second on Washington's roster, only behind Logan Thomas. So I just don't believe that he can be as productive as he was last year, come into a system with a familiar face, and them say, I'm just going to go ahead and use you how I used to use you after seeing how much better he did in a different way. I feel like that would be kind of naive. I guess I don't put it past NFL front offices, but I do believe that Curtis Samuel will operate a lot out of the slot. I think it might hurt Antonio Gibson just a little, but I wouldn't do anything with my rankings. I think that's a bit speculative. I do think it is going to be incredible to see Curtis Samuel play with Ryan Fitzpatrick, though.
So, yeah, I mean, he's playing with Ryan Fitzpatrick. He's playing with his old teammate in Terry McLaurin.
Yes.
They quickly crossed paths when they were both at Ohio State with Dwayne Haskins. But either way.
No one mentioned Dwayne Haskins, by the way. Everyone was excited when they got reunited, and no one mentioned Dwayne Haskins.
Well, I mean,
poor guy.
Yeah, poor guy. But either way, I mean, for Curtis Samuel, yeah, we've seen him really not just ascend, but also evolve as a wide receiver. In 2018, I mean, when he was playing across from DJ Moore, once he came back from his injury, it was you almost couldn't tell the difference between DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel on the field because he was so electric. But then it was 2019 where DJ Moore switches to more slot work, and we see Curtis Samuel playing on the outside, and he had literally like the most unrealized air yards across the entire league because of just how poor the quarterback play was after Cam Newton went down. I mean, Kyle Allen was throwing hospital balls, inaccurate balls like down the field. So we knew that Curtis Samuel could be a downfield threat. I believe his ADOT in 2019 was about 13.9, like 14, somewhere in there. But then it drops down to somewhere in the 8.8, 9.0 range in terms of ADOT, because we know that, again, his ascension as a receiver is not just the fact that he's producing more, it's how he's producing. Mm-hmm. Being more successful on both man and press coverage, being more successful on more routes, more intermediate routes versus running more of those posts or corner routes that would be a little bit more difficult for a quarterback like Kyle Allen in order to hit. So he can do it all. He showed that he could do it all this past season. So having another do-it-all type wide receiver alongside a proven asset in Terry McLaurin is just a huge, huge boost. And now having an aggressive quarterback in Ryan Fitzpatrick, I mean, the sky's the limit. The only thing that you do point out you do make a good point, though, about Antonio Gibson, because I believe last season it was 41 rushing attempts, if I'm not mistaken, for Curtis Samuel. So if we want to still see him be a part of not just the passing game, but also as a runner, then that's going to take away some work from Antonio Gibson. So not a ton. I mean, I'd still slot Antonio Gibson pretty much where he's sitting at in terms of dyno rankings, but Curtis Samuel, I mean, yeah, he's definitely a huge boost up in terms of value at this point. So moving on, I mean, next couple of guys that we'll talk about, we'll see if we can hit these two like real quick because both now have signed their franchise tags, and Chris Godwin and Allen Robinson. We just got word here tonight on Thursday, March 18th. So for both of those guys, I mean, Chris Godwin looking to run it back and get a second Super Bowl ring. Allen Robinson, hopefully he can get some more help, either some more help or better quarterback play like there in Chicago. I mean, better than Andy Dalton. So, I mean, with those two guys like signing their franchise tags, it looks like for at least right now, their values are sustained. Hopefully they get some long-term deals worked out. We'll see where Chris Godwin might go if he winds up leaving there after the 2021 season. But it looks like, at least to me, if you happen to have either of those two guys on your squads, you're probably pretty happy with them signing their tags at this point.
Well, yeah, they weren't going to find long-term deals out there anyways. And that was so we got an update while we were rehearsing for the show that Allen Robinson is considering signing his franchise tag because all day the report was that Allen Robinson is not expected to be seen much before week 1. And then Kenny Golladay came to visit and Allen Robinson, maybe I will sign my franchise tag. And then once we're speculating, Allen Robinson does sign his franchise tag. I think about it for a second and I say, yeah, I think that's probably a smart idea when you're going to get $17.9 million and they're about to replace you and rescind your offer. You should probably just sign it. But then I went and read every Allen Robinson quote that I could, and I just wanted to kind of see what can I expect in Dynasty. Well, according to Allen Robinson, he would love to stay with Chicago. I know a lot of people say that, but he has mentioned that he would love to be their all-time leader in receptions. He even states he's only 2,000 yards away from that. So that's pretty good news. He says that it's up to the team. They haven't even offered him anything close to what he's even being paid now or what he thinks he's worth. So I tend to feel like I like people to stay where they're at more often than not. Sometimes people have to get out of their situations because it's just tanking their value. But sure. I just kind of like to know what's going on. And when Allen Robinson's getting 160 targets, even if it's from terrible quarterback play, that's what I like to know when it's on my roster. So hopefully Allen Robinson can get something done with him, but he has signed his franchise tenure. Next is something kind of weird. Nelson Aguilar signs with New England for 2 years, $26 million. Don't have to talk about this one too much because we'll do all of New England when we finish. I think we'll just hit that briefly, but kind of weird. And he got one less year than Kendrick Bourne, who you're going to hit on in just a second. What do you think about Nelson Aguilar signing?
I mean, I love the fact that he basically took any of the negative discussion that was on him coming out of Philly and completely flipped the script. Like when he got to Las Vegas, I mean, he was essentially their wide receiver one. The Henry Ruggs pick, at least for his rookie season, somewhat backfired. I know he was injured at some point. He tested positive, or he either tested positive for COVID or came in close contact. But Nelson Aguilar was the guy for them. I mean, about a 15.1 ADOT, 28% target share, or take that back, 20% air yard share. I mean, for a guy that we'd seen out of Philly dropping passes left and right, he was as sure-handed as you could hope for in Las Vegas. So I'm happy to see him secure the bag. It's just, what is that passing team going to look like? But we'll talk about it here once we get to the tight end portion of it. Another big news that actually happened earlier today was the Will Fuller signing. So now Will Fuller is moving over to Miami. He still has 2 games, 2-game suspension to serve at the beginning of next year.
Mm-hmm.
So, but either way, I mean, with a 1-year, $10 million contract, I mean, that now puts Tua on the spot, because how can you not produce as a quarterback now with these weapons behind you? But I love it now for Will Fuller. I mean, regardless of what we think about Tua.
I believe I think it's 1 game. I think Schefter tweeted that he can start week 2.
Thank you.
So, yeah, one game. Well, that was for PEDs late last year, I think.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Okay, so one game for Will Fuller. I'm a Tua believer. A lot of people aren't. I just don't. If you're worried about the hip injury because it was catastrophic and you just refuse to believe that he could ever be what he was before that, okay, it's fine. But if you think that you can speculate just based off of last year how his career is going to pan out, but you thought he was going to be productive before that, I just don't understand that. I'm seeing a lot of I wouldn't say hate, but a lot of speculation that Tua is not going to be a franchise quarterback. A lot of speculation that he's going to be traded. A lot of negative connotations like that come out during free agency are times that you can capitalize in Dynasty. So Tua is expensive in Dynasty Superflex, of course, but he's never going to be cheaper than he is now. And honestly, a lot of these speculations are just the echo chamber on Twitter, just people we know that are saying things. So, in all honesty, the Dolphins might understand that last year was kind of a toss up, and they might be buying into him long term. So, this could all be smoke and mirrors, and you could get a discount on Tua for absolutely no reason. So, I don't mind Will Fuller going to Miami. I think that it's a really good situation. Hopefully, after the 1 year, $10 million, he can get something done long term with them. Let me jump into Corey Davis, former Dynasty darling. Then he wasn't, then he was. He signs with the New York Jets. I hope they keep Sam Darnold. I don't think he's had a fair crack in the NFL, but let's just assume he's going to be with Sam Darnold for now. That offense is looking pretty productive, especially if they add Juju Smith-Schuster, which is looking like may not happen, but it has been talked about all day long. So really good for Sam Darnold. Pretty good for Corey Davis. I don't think that it's not the best. It's not the worst signing. You know what I mean? Because we don't know what's going to happen long term with the quarterback situation there. It is 3 years, $37.5 million. That is telling. So if we're seeing people getting 3-year, 4-year contracts right now, it's a tough time to give out those contracts. It means they really like that player or they really have faith in that player's ability.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think for Corey Davis, the issue is not just can he play, but also can he succeed on his own, which I don't think he possibly can, because we saw that AJ Brown, like working alongside him, that's when he was really performing like at his best.
Right.
I mean, if you want to put him into the big slot role, having him play either at the flanker position, like opposite a established wide receiver one, like AJ Brown, or in this case, moving to New York, if he's playing across Denzel Mims, who we saw in flashes last season, I mean, he could be that wide receiver one that would allow Corey Davis to thrive. So with that, I think that Corey Davis is one of those guys that if you got him, sure, I think especially with the 3-year deal, you've got some continuity. Right. That system, I mean, the offense by itself, I think it could be fun. I mean, they're adding enough pieces where I think it could be a productive offense. And then, of course, if they wind up getting one of the big name quarterbacks, if they wind up getting Deshaun or whomever, I mean, at the very least, I think his value should be sustained over the next couple of seasons. So you should be able to at least keep that type of value like on your roster at this point. Or if you want to move him, you shouldn't have too much of a problem doing so.
Mm-hmm.
So the last couple of guys that we'll try and get to, so we'll talk about 2 guys that are not necessarily switching places, but at least one's replacing the other, in John Brown and Emmanuel Sanders. So John Brown, he leaves Buffalo. That saved him about $6-7 million in cap space. He moves over to Las Vegas to replace Nelson Aguilar. And then they wind up, and then the Bills, in response, wind up signing Emmanuel Sanders for a one-year, $6 million deal. So to me personally, I just would have thought they would have kept John Brown for that same price. I mean, at this point in their respective careers, I don't see not to say what the difference is, but I still think that John Brown provides the same amount of utility, if not more so, than Emmanuel Sanders.
Right.
So I didn't particularly get the move. And now, especially, I mean, since we're just talking about the Raiders at this point and the losses that they've just had over the past few days in across their offensive line, the addition of Kenyon Drake, I don't see a ton of value there for John Brown. Whereas for Emmanuel Sanders, I still think that it's Stephon Diggs. I still think that it's Gabe Davis. And then it could be somebody like Emmanuel Sanders being the third guy, since they do still run 4 receiver sets. So if it's if it's Cole Beasley still also, that's also going to be a part of that 4 wide receiver set. I do like that for him. But again, for both of those guys, they're not necessarily guys that I'm rushing out to trade for. But if you do happen to have them, I mean, they could be a part of a package or something like that if you wanted to move them in terms of dynasty.
Yeah, so I think Emmanuel Sanders, it's about time to get your third for him if you can. Same thing with Larry Fitzgerald. I mean, Larry Fitzgerald coined that term, go ahead and get your third for him, because for 6 years, Larry Fitzgerald was worth a third in Dynasty, right? So from somebody who tried to play Gabe Davis in every single opportunity he could in DFS last year, they do run plenty of 4 wide receiver sets, but that doesn't mean that Josh Allen's going to target the 4th wide receiver. He's usually YOLO'd it by then. So I just don't know that. I don't know if Emmanuel Sanders is going to have too many of those splash plays that we've seen from him as of late. I would probably try to send him for something like a 3rd or maybe a prospect. The next guy is Kendrick Bourne, somebody who I've had on my roster for years because he did good for me, I think, one time in preseason DFS, and I just decided I loved him. So he comes up big on 3rd downs, touchdowns. It's like he only plays when it matters. It's kind of weird, but he gets the longer of the contracts for the wide receivers. That's why I said weird earlier. So he gets the 3-year, $22.5 million contract with New England, another weapon for Cam Newton. They added a lot of guys, but I do think that Kendrick Bourne is going to have a role immediately. I think he is a solid player, and I'm glad that I've kept him on dynasty rosters for this long. If he's still on your waiver wire, not sure he is because of the injuries with San Francisco last year. Just check. You definitely want to add him.
Yeah, I think that's the case because if we're not looking for the guys that are going to be running some of those deeper routes or trying to hit those home runs, because that's not really where Cam Newton's shoulder is at least as far as we know. But if we're looking for those 3rd down type of guys, I mean, Nelson Aguilar definitely fits into that category. Kendrick Bourne definitely fits into that category where it's those intermediate routes, those across the field routes that Cam can hit without too much of an issue. So I think that's those type of plays that Kendrick Bourne succeeded on when he was in San Francisco. So I can see the same thing happening, and he can be a part of that security blanket for Cam. I mean, where I don't think he really had that in 2020, unless you really want to count N'Keal Harry. So I think that's a good addition for New England. And then for a guy like Kendrick Bourne, yeah, I mean, stash him. I mean, he'll pop up like across the during the regular season, like here and there. And I think he should be at least a decent value like for you. That's as to where he's sitting right now. Last wide receiver we're going to really talk about is Marvin Jones. So the hope was that he would move with Matthew Stafford out to LA. He goes down south to Jacksonville. So now we're assuming he's going to be, alongside DJ Chark, Visca, with Trevor Lawrence, assuming under center. So that three wide receiver core, I think, is pretty strong. And a guy like Marvin Jones, I know he's one of the older receivers, but he's one of those guys that, working out on the perimeter, having that 14-yard, 15-yard ADOT. That's one of those guys that will allow your other guys like Chark in order to be one of those intermediate receivers that you can use and still work as a primary receiver within that offense. So I like the move so far for Jacksonville.
Yeah, I think Marvin Jones is on the opposite end of that. You better get your 3rd for him. I don't think that you'll quite get him for a 3rd, but I think you would be surprised for how cheap. And it is a player that I would recommend kicking the tires on in your leagues because I don't think that Marvin Jones is close to done, and he's got plenty of room for opportunity, especially I don't know the situation with DJ Chark now, but I know there was trade talks in the past. It seems like an eternity ago, but I think it was just last week. So he has immediate opportunity already. Keelan Cole left, who we'll talk about in just a second. But if DJ Chark leaves, oh my goodness, he's the primary option for Trevor Lawrence coming out. So that being said, either way, he's going to be productive. Either way, he's going to be worth more to your roster than what you traded for him. So I would definitely check on trading for Marvin Jones. The last few we have is AJ Green signed with Arizona, 1 year, $8.5 million. Rashard Higgins, Cleveland, 1 year, $2.38 million. We were both surprised by that. I thought that would have been more. They seem to love him there. Keelan Cole signed with the New York Jets for 1 year, $5.5 million. Adam Schefter says that Keelan Cole had a lot more interest than some of the prime wide receiver candidates for free agency. So that was a nice little nugget, whatever. I guess that probably more so means that they thought he was more valuable than the market said. It doesn't mean he was more valuable than those wide receivers. Yeah. And then lastly, Philip Dorsett, everybody forgot about him probably because he opted out last season. He's a speedster. He was with the Seahawks. He signed for, actually, I'm not sure. That's the only value we don't have. I could not find that. He signed with Jacksonville. So that doesn't really hurt Marvin Jones in any way. In my opinion, he's a speed guy that's going to add receiving ability downfield for Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, he could be just that other guy. So Marvin Jones and him working in rotation, like
Sure.
opposite shark. So I think the one that, the two that touch that really stick out to me. Well, one being AJ Green, one of my favorite
Right.
players, if not my favorite player, like from my quote unquote favorite team. Or at least I don't know, I've got relationship issues with the Bengals. But seeing him go down and going down to Arizona means that pretty much he's not going to retire as a Bengal, which hurts my heart. But I still think that there's something left in the tank for him. And I know that some folks see after his last season in Cincinnati, they think he's dusty and like he can't really do anymore. But I don't know. I mean, there were a number of plays last year that I think Damian Parsons, like on Twitter, was showing from a film perspective. I was looking at his contested catch rate. I mean, his contested catch rate was actually higher than Devontae Adams, just a couple percentage points behind Tyreek Hill. So I think from a physicality perspective, I mean, he can still do it. He just needs a quarterback that is more accurate to some of those on some of those throws, because AJ Green's not creating separation like he used to be able to, which he's old and he was injured, and he was also coming off a season where they got a new quarterback and he had no time to actually work out with that quarterback during the offseason. So I can understand why his numbers were down in Cincinnati during his final year. And of course, the issues that he's been having with Cincinnati for the past 2 seasons in terms of getting a long-term contract so that he can retire as a Bengal, which obviously didn't happen. So that one stuck out to me. Also, Rashard Higgins, we saw after OBJ went down. I mean, Higgins stepped into the OBJ role, and as the offense started to evolve over the back half of the season for Cleveland, like Higgins was their wide receiver one. I mean, he operated as the Odell Beckham, or as the wide receiver one, and I think he performed really admirably. I mean, Jarvis Landry still stole the show because he is the more talented receiver, but being able to play both on the outside and both from the interior, I think Rashard Higgins showed quite a bit as to where he's at as a receiver. So I was hoping that he would get a little bit more, to be quite honest. But I can understand, and I'm hoping he's one of those guys that I'm looking to stash on my dynasty roster for sure. So let's see. We'll wrap things up real quick with the tight ends. I mean, the 2 big ones: Johnny Smith to New England, 4 years, $50 million. But then right behind that, I mean, Johnny season was here and gone, almost within the 1 day. Hunter Henry also signs with New England, 3 years, $37.5 million. So now we immediately had the Gronk Hernandez type of takes immediately coming out. But to me, it just all signals more options for Cam. This is also on a team that had one of the lowest neutral passing rates in the league, had the highest rushing red zone rate in the league, because Cam led the NFL, or led all the quarterbacks in the NFL in rushing touchdowns. So I mean, I just can't see a ton of volume for either of those guys. And also with the additions of Aguilar, and we were talking about earlier about not Keelan Cole, but Kendrick Bourne. I mean, for me, it's just the volume is going to be split across most of those guys.
Yeah, and we have to remember they're going to have Edelman back too, right? So, of course, N'Keal Harry has to do something eventually, right? So now we can finally talk about the whole New England offense. They said, why'd they sign 2 new tight ends when they already had N'Keal Harry on the roster? But so anyways, I think that Jonnu is an incredible real NFL signing, but we have to remember he ceded a lot of routes run last year to Anthony Fersker, because Jonnu was used more as a passing tight end, more in short yardage situations. You'll remember he got some carries, utilized heavily on 3rd down, important situations. Very, very good real NFL signing. I'm not saying that the New England Patriots are going to do the exact same thing that the Tennessee Titans did, but if they see Jonnu in the way that the Tennessee Titans did, which I think the contract kind of says it does, because he got a longer contract for more money. I think they think he helps the team quite a bit. Then I think that means that Hunter Henry gets a lot of that receiving work. Now, it's just speculation, but a lot of Dynasty fantasy football has to be speculation, right? And you have to pick one of them. I noticed in your startup, Hunter Henry went 4 picks behind Jonnu, with only Irv Smith between the two. And I think that's probably close, but I will lean Hunter Henry on the little hunch that Hunter Henry ends up being involved more as a receiving tight end, and Jonnu just kind of does his work in the trenches and just really helps the team overall. So
I agree.
The next one is Gerald Everett. Oh my goodness, I've been a Gerald Everett fan since he came out, and now he's going with a familiar face. So you've got Gerald Everett going to Seattle for 1 year, $7 million, and I we talked about Will Disley, we talked about Hollister. They shouldn't be involved, but they probably will be involved. So it's kind of frightening to really go all in on Gerald Everett's season, especially since he's going to be a lot more expensive in terms of dynasty value now. But if Jacob Hollister and Will Disley are not involved because they just signed Gerald Everett in free agency, then I mean, you're probably getting a discount now because Gerald Everett is extremely talented and he has never been able to work on his own, and he's be attached to Russell Wilson. So huge stock up for Gerald Everett, in my opinion. And I don't think that he should have competition, but like we discussed, he might.
Yeah, he might, and they still have. I mean, yeah, they still have Will Disley. I don't know if Freddie Swaim is still a part of that squad, but Disley, between Jacob Hollister, I mean, it's going to be difficult, especially on a team that has been in the bottom half of the league in terms of passing to their tight ends over the past 2 seasons. I think they were 18th this past season, 27th the year prior. But I think that was mostly due to injuries. They didn't have a ton of decent tight ends to pass to. But either way, I mean, we've been looking at primarily it's been the wide receivers. We want shares of Lockett. We want DK Metcalf like on our teams. And if we're already looking at the Seattle squad as being one that's going to have less pass volume in 2021 and not more, given some of the changes that they've already made on their coaching staff, it's hard for me to get excited. But I do agree that from where Gerald Everett was in terms of value prior to the signing, definitely a bump up in terms of where we should be valuing him now, because we can look at his contract, we can look at like where Seattle might be over the next couple of seasons, and he could wind up getting some more value, or at least providing more value over those next couple of seasons. So I'm definitely with that.
The familiar face I forgot to mention was Shane Waldron, the offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks, was the tight ends coach for a time with the Rams when Gerald Everett was drafted in the 2nd round. So that's why I think that there might not be as much competition as we would like to think. Hopefully Jacob Hollister and Will Disley don't have to be heavily involved.
Right. All right, so just to wrap up the tight end position, we've got Jared Cook just signing with the Chargers, not completely killing the value of the great Donald Parham, but $1 year, $6 million deal for Jared Cook. Gronk is back with the Bucks to try and run it back again. 1 year, $10 million deal for him to re-sign in Tampa. So which of those 2 guys really stood out to you?
Just Rob Gronkowski running it back. Here's the thing. We're talking dynasty here, right? This matters. Rob Gronkowski was going to test the free agent market, which means he still intends on playing football. That's big. That's a big difference for his dynasty value. If you think that he's going to do 1 year at a time, okay, maybe. I mean, he's Gronk. He's unpredictable. But if he was going to go test the free agent market, it seems to me that he's interested in continuing to play football. And if you could get him off someone in dynasty who thinks that it's a one-and-done kind of deal, you might scrap out a few years out of Gronk that you didn't expect. So, yep. So, and then Jared Cook to the LA Chargers. I do want to mention that just quickly because I think that it's going to be a productive year for Jared Cook with Justin Herbert. So I think it's worth. I don't want to say give too much up for him, and he did sign with a new team, so it is a little more expensive. But if you don't have a top 4 tight end, you don't really have a tight end. So you got to get those cheap guys down. I mean, Jimmy Graham's been one of those guys for the last few years that you could get incredibly cheap and you get a little bit of production out of them. So I would check on what his value is in your league. Don't know what I would necessarily give up for. I mean, I would give up something like a third. I know I keep using that, but a third is usually that kind of value marker for I would like to take a shot in the draft because I have a young team. Here's my vet. It's the kind of deal that I'd be looking for to get Jared Cook, or a third equivalent, of course. So I don't know if you'd be targeting Jared Cook, but unless you have anything else on tight ends, unless you have anything else on the day, that's it for us.
Nope, I think that's it. I mean, appreciate everybody coming out and checking us out. Come find us here at Football Guys. I'm at Chris Allen FFWX. Adam's over at AP Wilde. So you should be able to find us each week, kind of going over the news and notes of the previous week and trying to break it down from a dynasty perspective to see how it's going to impact your rosters.
Yep, and it's not always going to be this long form. I mean, this has been an insanely busy week with free agency. You'll get one more show probably like this of this duration for the draft. And then from then on, we're just going to be touching on the subjects that were covered by Joe in the Football Guys newsletter throughout the week. So any headline that comes from Joe in the newsletter, make sure you subscribe to that. If it's Dynasty relevant, it'll be talked about on the show. So thank you all for coming out. Don't forget about the early bird special, and talk to you next time.